You've been praying to a mistranslation. The sanitized, untouchable king the church handed you never actually existed. Beneath centuries of rigid dogma lies a gritty, marginalized mystic whose real name and radical secret about heaven will violently shatter your religion, yet finally awaken your soul. Have you ever sat in the stillness of a sanctuary, bowed your head in reverence, and yet felt a haunting, inexplicable silence echoing back at you? You are not alone in this profoundly human experience. I remember feeling that exact same way, following the traditions, reciting the prayers, and desperately seeking a connection with the divine, only to feel a lingering, heavy void. It is a quiet aching that suggests the institutional stories we have been handed might just be the surface of a much deeper, older mystery. What if this feeling of being a stranger in a familiar spiritual house isn't a flaw in your faith, but the very beginning of a deeper, more personal search for truth? Bible Tales US 07 welcomes you to this space of reflection. If you have ever felt that quiet pull toward the ancient past and the mysteries of faith, please consider subscribing to our channel so we can continue exploring these profound historical journeys together. I have spent years wrestling with that existential emptiness, wondering how a message meant to offer ultimate liberation could sometimes feel so confined by rigid structures. For many of us, the search for a more authentic, grounded connection leads us back to the very roots of history. It can be a startling, yet deeply moving realization to discover that the name we hear so often today, Jesus, is actually the result of centuries of linguistic translation, shaped by Greek, Latin, and English filters. But to his mother, his family, and his earliest followers walking the dusty streets of the ancient world, he was known by his original Aramaic and Hebrew name, Yeshua. In the ancient traditions of the Near East, a name was never merely a static label used for passing identification. To the ancient mind, a name carried the very essence, character, and profound presence of the individual, with some cultures believing that spoken words held a deep, symbolic resonance. While history and linguistics view this evolution as a natural cultural shift, for those of us on a spiritual journey, uncovering the name Yeshua often feels like finding a lost key. It represents a deeply personal shift from looking at a distant figure shaped by centuries of institutional history to seeking a closer, more intimate understanding of the teacher who actually lived. Returning to the historical roots of Yeshua is not about uncovering hidden physical mechanics, but about peeling back the layers of dogma that can cloud our own connection to faith. It is a journey of realizing that the profound comfort and spiritual peace we seek might not be locked away in a distant sky, but can be cultivated quietly and patiently within our own hearts. To cultivate that quiet peace, I realized I first had to strip away the gilded imagery of European royalty and step onto the sun-scorched earth where a working-class rabbi actually walked. For so long, the image of the Savior I was given was immaculate and untouchable, a glowing figure hovering just above the grit of human suffering, speaking in high-minded riddles. But that pristine portrait never resonated with the deepest parts of my soul, because it lacked the profound vulnerability of the human experience. I had to embark on a mental and historical pilgrimage back to the 1st century Middle East. I began to imagine the blistering heat of the Galilean sun, the suffocating dust kicked up by Roman sandals, and the smell of raw fish and unbaked bread that permeated the villages. When you start to view Yeshua not as an untouchable deity floating through life, but as an impoverished Jewish mystic living under the crushing weight of a brutal military occupation, everything changes. He was a man whose hands were likely calloused from physical labor, whose feet bled from walking miles upon miles of unforgiving terrain. He sat with outcasts, not as an act of calculated charity, but because he intimately understood their marginalization. This is where my faith began to violently shift, cracking open in the best possible way. I stopped looking for a king draped in purple robes and started recognizing the profound beauty of a teacher who wept in the garden, who felt the sting of betrayal, and who experienced the agonizing silence of God. Finding the historical Yeshua meant letting go of a safe, domesticated religion and coming face to face with a radical, subversive love that challenged the oppressive systems of his day. It was terrifying, yet incredibly validating, to realize that the divine chose to reveal itself not in the sanitized halls of power, but in the sweat, tears, and dirt of everyday human survival. He was a man who knew the smell of rain on dry dirt and the desperate ache of a marginalized people hoping for redemption. Understanding the physical earth he walked upon naturally compelled me to listen more closely to the actual language he spoke, revealing a profound disconnect between his poetic native tongue and the rigid theology we inherited. When I first learned that Yeshua did not speak the analytical Greek of the New Testament manuscripts, nor the legalistic Latin of the Roman Church, it felt as though a veil had been lifted from my eyes. He spoke Aramaic, a deeply earthy, rhythmic, and resonant language where a single word does not just point to a hard, fixed definition, but breathes with multiple layers of meaning. In the Western world, we have been conditioned to treat spiritual texts like legal contracts, parsing verbs and nouns to build walls of doctrine that tell us exactly who is in and who is out. But Aramaic defies that kind of intellectual imprisonment. I remember the profound shock of discovering how his teachings had been subtly altered through translation. When Yeshua spoke of the kingdom of heaven, the Greek translation often made it sound like a distant, ethereal destination we go to after we die, a reward for good behavior. But in his native Aramaic, the concept of Malkutha Deshmaya is far more immediate and intimate. It is not a place on a map or a city in the clouds. It is a present state of being, a guiding principle, a reality that exists within and among us right here, right now. It is the breath of the divine moving through our daily actions. Learning this broke my heart, not out of sorrow, but out of a profound sense of relief. I realized I had spent years waiting for a future rescue, entirely missing the invitation to participate in bringing heaven to earth in this very moment. The rigid rules, the fear of eternal punishment, the agonizing over theological correctness, all of it began to dissolve into the background. What remained was a mystical, vibrant call to transformation. Yeshua was not trying to establish a new religion with a strict behavioral code. He was desperately trying to wake us up, inviting us into an intimate, lived experience of the divine that no institution could ever truly gatekeep. Yet, realizing that this beautiful, ungated experience is available to us requires a terrifying willingness to dismantle the very walls we once relied upon for shelter. I will not pretend that this phase of the journey was easy. In fact, deconstruction is perhaps the loneliest and most agonizing process a spiritually seeking heart can endure. When you begin to question the historical accuracy of the doctrines you were spoon-fed since childhood, you aren't just challenging ancient history. You are untethering yourself from your community, your family's traditions, and your own fundamental sense of safety. I spent countless sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, consumed by a deeply ingrained fear. A voice in the back of my mind whispered that I was becoming a heretic, that my pursuit of the historical Yeshua was somehow a betrayal of God. It is a profound kind of grief to mourn the loss of a simple, black and white faith. I missed the days when I had easy answers, when reading a single Bible verse was enough to quiet my anxieties. But once you have seen the expansiveness of the truth, You cannot force yourself back into the suffocating confines of a small, fear-based theology. I had to learn to sit in the tension of not knowing. I had to forgive myself for daring to ask questions that the pulpit told me were dangerous. Slowly, the fear began to recede, replaced by a raw, fragile, but undeniably authentic sense of wonder. I realized that true faith is not the absence of doubt, nor is it the blind acceptance of a creed written by men hundreds of years after Yeshua died. True faith is the courage to keep walking into the mystery, trusting that the divine is large enough to hold my questions, my anger, and my relentless curiosity. Stripping away the layers of dogma felt like losing my religion, but it was actually the process of finding my soul, forging a faith that is no longer fragile because it is no longer built on the brittle foundation of absolute certainty, but on the enduring rock of living truth. Stepping off that brittle foundation does not leave us falling into the abyss, but rather allows us to finally plant our feet firmly on the ground of a vibrant, daily spirituality. Today, my relationship with the divine looks drastically different than it did in the pews of my past, and yet it has never felt more profound or alive. I no longer feel the desperate need to defend God or to convince others that my theological framework is the only correct lens through which to view the universe. Instead, the ancient name of Yeshua has become an anchor for me, a quiet, internal reminder of a love that transcends human boundaries and religious tribalism. When I say his name now, I do not picture a distant judge waiting to tally my sins. I feel the presence of a brother, a radical teacher, a fellow traveler in this chaotic human experience who points me back to the divine spark within myself and every person I meet. This awakened faith is not confined to Sunday mornings or designated holy spaces. I find the sacred in the mundane, in the steam rising from my morning coffee, in the laughter of a stranger, in the quiet moments of tending to a garden, and in the painful, necessary work of standing up for justice in a broken world. Yeshua's life is no longer a story I simply read. It is a rhythm I try to live. The spiritual emptiness that once haunted me has been replaced by a deep, abiding stillness. It is the realization that I am already home, that I am deeply known, and that the ancient wisdom of the past is not a relic to be worshipped, but a living flame meant to illuminate our path forward. If my journey has taught me anything, it is that the deepest truths of our existence are rarely found in the loud, crowded arenas of institutional certainty. They are found in the quiet, dusty edges of history, waiting patiently for those brave enough to listen for the whisper of an ancient name and to finally awaken to the kingdom that has been waiting within them all along. The journey of rediscovering Yeshua is a profound transition from adhering to rigid, institutionalized religion to embracing a raw, deeply authentic, and living faith. By stripping away the sanitized, imperial images of a distant deity and the dogmatic translations of his native Aramaic teachings, we uncover a first-century, working-class Jewish mystic who intimately understood the grit of human suffering and marginalization. This process of spiritual deconstruction, while initially isolating and terrifying, is ultimately a beautiful act of liberation. It requires mourning the loss of black and white certainties and unlearning the fear-based theology that often turns spiritual texts into exclusive legal contracts. However, this painful unearthing is strictly necessary to build a faith that is not brittle with absolute certainty, but resilient in its acceptance of mystery. Ultimately, shedding these inherited layers does not lead to a spiritual void. Instead, it awakens us to the kingdom of heaven, not as a distant afterlife reward, but as a present, breathing reality within and around us. Faith transforms from a strict behavioral code into a daily rhythm of recognizing the sacred in the mundane, from a morning cup of coffee to the pursuit of justice for the oppressed. It is a powerful reminder that the divine is found not in the loud halls of human power, but in the quiet, dusty edges of our everyday existence, inviting us to live with radical love, deep compassion, and a profound, abiding peace. True spiritual awakening requires the courage to dismantle the comfortable, inherited walls of absolute certainty. Faith is not about blindly accepting rigid doctrines or fearing a distant, judgmental deity. It is about leaning into the mystery of the human experience. The most profound divine truths are not found in gate-kept institutional dogma, but in radical love, vulnerability, and the recognition that the sacred already exists in the raw, messy reality of our everyday lives. Embrace the tension of not knowing. Allow yourself to ask hard questions without needing immediate, black-and-white answers. View your doubts not as a betrayal of faith, but as a necessary catalyst for deeper spiritual growth and authentic self-discovery. Find the sacred in the mundane. Stop waiting for a distant future rescue or relying solely on designated holy spaces. Actively look for the divine in your daily routines, the warmth of the sun, a meaningful conversation, or a simple act of tending to your home. Shift from judgment to radical empathy. Just as the historical Yeshua sat with the marginalized, practice stepping outside of tribalism and judgment. Seek to deeply understand and connect with those who are overlooked, transforming your beliefs into a lived rhythm of love, action, and justice. What is one simple, everyday moment where you feel the most peace or connection to something greater than yourself? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to read your perspective, and sharing your experience helps create a wonderful space for everyone to reflect and find inspiration. If this message resonated with you, please hit the subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and gives us the immense motivation to keep creating deep, meaningful content for you to enjoy.